So the subject of Eurocentric views, and we would like to think that someday there could be a meeting of the minds between these two very, very different types of cultures. There's times when it's easy to despair that there ever could be. Very, very different way of looking at many, many, many things. So let's look at domesticated animals. Now there's only 38 domesticated animals in the world. Western Hemisphere didn't really have that many. The alpaca and the llama are small. They can carry a child and they can carry some goods, but they can't be used for plows or for carrying people. Now in Eurasia, of course, they had the horse, which had been developed for a long time. They had the oxen, they had the cow, they had the camel. They had some of these large animals. Well, the last horses and camels in the Western Hemisphere continents disappeared in some of the ice ages, and there just wasn't any there. They did have some species at one point. So there's a difference in the way that many, many things developed, and particularly the food and mechanizing farming, some of those sorts of things. It's much quicker in some places, well, China, for example, where they invented certain types of plows that even Europe had put up with these straight plows for many, many hundreds of years. So things don't always occur to different civilizations, and they happen at different times, but also it has to do with what did they have on hand. Now they did domesticate certain animals, and they did domesticate turkeys, but there's only certain animals that can be domesticated in the first place. Now alphabets, I feel this strongly because I grew up as an alphabet guy. It's like, well, you got to have an alphabet, but there's many hundreds of cultures around the world that do not have alphabets or do not have symbols or hieroglyphics or anything like that. They have an oral culture, and they can, for example, read something such as a wampum belt. Maybe we're 8 or 10 hours of recitation that might be involved to read a wampum belt, and they could sometimes use that for communication, the wampum, between different cultures that spoke different languages, but they may have a specialist within their tribe who would be able to decipher what was meant by wampum, and the people could communicate it in that way. Outlawing cultural practices, as has been done down through the ages by conquerors, and that was a very common aspect of the conquest, was outlawing their cultural practices, outlawing languages, outlawing spiritual practices. The church adds an extra element to the confusion. When you have a genocide going on and on and on for 500 years, it's very confusing. But when you add the church into it, it adds an extra element of confusion. It brings God into it. Now the wheel is one that's always trotted out by anthropologists, and it always was. Now they had the wheel and the axle and used it for children's toys. They didn't apply it into their technology because it wasn't practical for them. They didn't have animals that could do that sort of thing. And cleanliness was another one. They had different attitudes toward cleanliness. And that went on for hundreds of years. The second law ever passed by Queen Isabella, who sent Columbus over, was to do with cleanliness. As early as 1494, the second law she ever passed was to outlaw bathing for the Indians. The indigenous were not allowed to bathe, very bad for their health. They were doing it at least once a day, sometimes more, and she outlawed that. The different types of thinking.